When I was 7, we moved to Fort Myers, Florida, into a neighborhood called Heritage Farms. That was when my mom and father were looking at the property with real estate agent. They ended up splitting up. My father in what was to be their bedroom with the real estate agent, and my mother in the back 2 bedrooms, which was going to be mine and my brother's rooms. My mom said she should have told my dad from the get-go that she had a very overwhelmingly oppressive, heavy, and creepy feeling, and ran back to the other bedroom to meet with my father. She said that was her first red flag, something was wrong with the house. Well, my mother never told my father, and eventually we ended up buying the house. Cut to about 6 months later, I was heavily picked on in that neighborhood. I was very clingy to my mother and father, and when you walked the hallways of the house, it felt like something was sticking right on your back, kind of like lurking where you would end up running to your destination in your own house. After about another 6 months, I eventually told my parents that I can hear people in my closet talking, and I would hear laughing and someone whispering, "Hey, you," and then there would be another laugh. I remember that I heard the noise of what seemed like cards shuffling and an old saloon piano playing. But the noise seemed to come from very far away, like my closet was like a mile away, which made me want to sleep in my brother's room all the time, and even more so because he was 17 and was always out with his friends or working or at church. I'm not sure if anyone here is familiar with a Friday night lineup back in the 80s called TJIF. It's where they had Full House, Family Matters, and I think 2 other shows, but my parents used to let me stay up late and watch the whole lineup. Needless to say, I was in my older brother's room at the time, covered up, but watching the lineup. The very back bedroom was my brother's. Then you had a door to the left that was to a bathroom and another little door made of metal, mind you. And off to the right was my bedroom that I didn't want to sleep in, and the opening to the living room into the kitchen, and what have you. So I was watching the shows, and I had this desire, feeling, urge, or whatever you want to call it, to crane my head to look out into the hallway. It was approximately 9 or so, and the house was black, save for the hue of my TV. When I cranked my neck to look out, in the middle of the hallway between the bathroom and my bedroom, that I didn't want to sleep in, was a tall, blacker than black of night figure with a hat on its head and a round thing in his hand. He did not have red eyes. It did not say anything or make any noise. It just stood, making itself known, and quietly walked or floated to the left. And I can hear the metal door in my bathroom leading to the patio pool area open and then close. And boy, did I scream for my parents, bloodily. So in an effort to make an already long post just a hair shorter, I explained to my parents what I saw, and I begged to sleep with them. Of course, my dad thought I was nuts, and that I just had an overactive imagination, so on and so forth. The sleeping in my room took a toll on my father, and he got really nasty with me and demanded that I start sleeping in my own room. That's when my mother spoke up and said to him that, no, he's going to be sleeping with us, because I saw the same thing. She said that she saw it in the daytime, when she was washing dishes in the hallway. My mom is not a spooky kind of woman, and she said she thought it was the angel of death. I guess having my mom and dad know I wasn't lying made it a little bit easier to continue to sleep in the back bedroom, so I did. But my dad is kind of a right here and now, tangible kind of man, so that goes without saying that he thought my mom and I were both nuts. My mom and I went to Baltimore to see my grandparents and just to get away. Well, about 3 or 4 days later, I remember my mom sitting at my grandma's house, get a call from my father, and he was very, very upset. He said that he wants us to come home because he saw what we saw, and he said that he was very scared. So we came home about 4 days later after the phone call. And there was that 3 or 4 days to give my dad enough time to see a couple more things. He said that one night he came home from work, made himself something to eat, turned the TV on in the living room by the 2 back bedrooms. And he said that he looked off to the back bedroom and he saw what looked like many tiny stick figures walking and jumping around. He said it spooked him so much he slept on the patio on one of those PVC recliners that we had with our dog. It's a really odd thing, but you hear your dad make those kind of claims, like when I said, and he's a very real, tangible kind of person. That story just always spooked me to death. I remember one day after school, I walked home from the bus stop and found my mother sitting outside, which she never does. She told me that she heard the garage door open and close, and the doors that led from the garage to the entry of the house open and close. And something hollered, "Mom, I'm home." She was in her bedroom making the bed and thought my brother had come home from school early. So she said, "I'm back here, Howard." Then one more time, "Mom, I'm home." She looked and there was no truck, no trace of my brother. She called the high school and he was still in class. My mom was telling me one day that she was washing dishes. She saw a tiny man wearing a suit and a top hat walk by the opening of the kitchen, look at her, look away, and then continue to walk. But she never saw him again. And she would see wisps of smoke constantly. We thought all the activity in the house was subjected to those in the back bedroom. I remember my dad, my mom, and I watching TV one night, sitting on their bed. And my dad had this pink recliner by the opening of their doorway. He loved that thing. I remember that we all looked over at the same time and saw something black as pitch peering over the top of the recliner. And when we made eye contact with it, it took off towards wherever in the house. I remember contacting the owner of the house when I was like 23, explaining what I'm explaining to you now. They never wrote back, but what I experienced in that house always had a profound effect on me, and I have never seen anything since. My first encounter with HatMan was when I was about 5 years old. We were living in an old house next to a cemetery. My bedroom window overlooked the children's part of the graves. I would see a large, maybe about 6 foot tall, shadow man wearing a round top hat on the wall next to the window frequently. That window would open during the night, and I remember constantly having to get up to close it. My next encounter with the Hat Man was much different. I was 9 years old, and we've been living in a motel on the shady part of town. I started having reoccurring nightmares involving a tall man dressed in a black suit, wearing a square top hat. I was terrified of this man because he had red eyes, and I had the feeling if I looked into them long enough, he would steal my soul. He started appearing on the ceiling above my bed after about a month of having these nightmares. I would just wrap my entire body up in blankets to hide myself from him. Being 9 years old, I didn't fully know what a soul was, but I know I didn't want him to take mine. My sister told me some nights she'll wake up with a guy in a hat standing in her doorway. What's odd is she told me it's more of a calm feeling. She claims she isn't scared, she just goes back to sleep. What bothers me is recently she said that it was standing next to her bed and she went to sleep. A few days ago she said someone was stomping around her bed and into the hallway, and that's what terrified her. And about a week before, she felt caressing on her back. I have 2 nephews who live with her. The youngest, being 7, does not like to sleep in his room by himself if the other is not there, and he visits his father's side of the family often. She won't let me ask any of them if they've had experiences at night like she has been having. I brought her some sage from a local shop that she does use and prays to clean the house. She used it recently and said it basically exploded when she lit it, but it doesn't seem to affect her life in a negative way, it's just creepy. Myself, on the other hand, have had unusual experiences a few years back. I could not move, and I looked up. There was a figure with a high collar standing next to my bed with its back turned. I remember the collar as it was very high, and there were markings on it. I was so terrified, but somehow I allowed sleep to overcome me. But it just contributed to sleep paralysis. Safe to say, I try never to sleep on my back. I have had dozens of episodes of sleep paralysis throughout my life. All were accompanied by a feeling of panic and dread. Naturally, my experience with HatMan happened during one of these events. Afternoon naps were a normal part of life, and this particular nap took place about 35 years ago in a first-floor bedroom. I was awaking from a deep sleep facing a window. I came to the realization that I could look out the window into the front yard, but could not move any part of my body, even to speak. Before I can gain the use of my vulgarity muscles, a man wearing a fedora-style hat and a long trench coat slowly walked by the window, from right to left. All the while, as this man walked past my window, he pivoted his head to maintain direct eye contact with me. Knowing that this person's presence was highly irregular, I was filled with a deep feeling of dread. This man wearing a hat absolutely exuded a strong essence of malevolence. After becoming fully awake and functional, the cobwebs of this encounter blew away in the late summer evening breeze. But I know it actually happened. This was a decade before the World Wide Web brought instant information into nearly every household. About 20 years after this particular afternoon nap, I first read about the Hat Man on the internet. I immediately made the connection, and I knew that for some reason the Hat Man came to visit me. So, what I'm about to tell you is 100% true and not fabricated or exaggerated in any way. When I was between the ages of 9 and 12 in the mid-80s, my sister suddenly one day became terrified to go inside or anywhere near my bedroom. When I asked her what was wrong and why she was so petrified to the point of tears, she said that she had been seeing a shadowy figure of a tall man wearing a long trench coat and a 10-gallon hat, which is a term used for a particular style of hat, usually worn by cowboys. At first, I thought it was just her paranoid imagination because she was 3 years younger than I was, and because we enjoyed watching horror movies together quite often for fun and the thrill. She told me about 5 or 6 times, and her genuine terror she displayed started to scare me a bit. So I told her I didn't want to hear about it anymore because it was cruel to make up stories just to scare me and it wasn't funny. About a month after telling her that, I had my first encounter with this being, and I was beyond terrified and shocked. I had got up at about 2 or 3 a.m. to use the restroom located at the other side of my house, then stopped by the kitchen to grab a glass of water. Then, seemingly out of nowhere and for absolutely no reason, an overwhelming feeling of dread and complete, utter fear just came on to me. I froze in place for a few minutes. Once I was able to get a grip on my intense fear, I decided to go through the living room to turn the light on so that I can see down the hallway that led to my bedroom at the end of the hall. I made my way through the living room and made it to the main overhead light, and quickly switched it on. I peered down the hall and I saw this thing. He was exiting my bedroom, then stopped moving and stood in the hallway facing me. He was just like my sister said, tall, had a long trench coat and a 10-gallon style hat. From what I can see, I couldn't make out a face on him at all. He seemed to be faceless, which made his appearance even more terrifying. I quickly shut off the living room light and did something any scared young girl would do. I climbed underneath the kitchen table and covered my mouth to stifle the sounds of me crying. And I stayed there for a long while before I got the courage to come out and get a flashlight, then proceed down the hallway into my sister's room instead of mine. And I got in bed with her. I told her what I saw, and I apologized to her for not believing her. Keep in mind, this was the mid to late 80s, and the internet wasn't around to make these stories up and spread around the world as true stories. There were no books that I know of that described anything like this. I saw him several more times after that, each time either entering or exiting my bedroom. It was terrifying, but I stopped seeing him by age 13 and decided to tell my parents what I had been seeing up to that point. A look of dread swept across my mother's face, and she told me that she saw it a few times as well. In my room, standing over my bed as I slept. My aunt at the time was a devout Wiccan, and she came over to do a smudging ritual to rid our house of unwanted spirits. We never saw that thing again after that. I grew up and got married, had children of my own, and forgot about the whole thing. Up until one night I woke up late in my room, really thirsty, and turned my lamp on, shining light into the hallway of my home, and I briefly saw a flash of something black, just for a few seconds, and then vanished directly in front of my twin daughter's bedroom. They were only 4 years old at the time, so I quickly got out of bed and made my way into their room. I was astonished to find the exact same being that tainted my childhood standing at the foot of my small children's beds, seemingly watching them sleep. I was terrified, but I went into full-force mother protection mode and screamed at this thing. I told it to get away from my babies and to do it now. It turned to face my direction, tipped its hat at me, and vanished into thin air. After that, I've never seen whatever that thing was again, and my children are adults now, 25 and 19. But it's both amazing and scary to grow up and find out that there are many people from all over the world that have encountered such a thing. I've read many stories and done a lot of research in an attempt to find out what this thing is, where it came from, what it wants, etc., and haven't learned anything, except concluding on a few things. 1, it's some type of shadow person. 2, it seems to have some sort of connection with children. And 3, it seems to like to hang around children's bedrooms and stand over them as they sleep. And that's the only thing I know about this thing. Does anyone else have any information about what this being is? How many of you have encountered it? Please come forward with your experiences. I've been desperately searching for more answers for years now. Plus, I love the comfort I get knowing I'm not alone. Thank you all in advance. I hope you ghouls enjoyed these HatMan stories. I always like the HatMan. I feel like I've seen him before, but also I don't know, just because I've seen so many, spirits and whatnot in my lifetime. The one time I thought I saw the HatMan, my mom adamantly told me it was my grandfather, because my grandfather kind of dressed with the big hat all the time. So I'm not sure, because after I heard these HatMan stories, I'm like, holy crap. Like, when I first heard of these a couple of years ago, I was like, that's very similar to what I've seen. So I don't know. Have you ghouls ever encountered the HatMan? Let me know in the comments below. But as always, ghouls, the last video will be on the top left. The next video will be on the bottom left. All my social medias are on the screen, as well as in the description box below. And remember, there's always someone or something watching you.